Debra Winger was regarded as one of the best actresses of the 1980s. She had the ability to light up the screen with a simple gesture, look, or heartfelt statement. She received 2 Oscar nods in 3 years for An Officer and a Gentleman in terms of endearment, and she was likened to Meryl Streep and Jane Fonda. He became the favorite of all the big directors, from Europe to Hollywood. However, she almost disappeared a little more than 10 years later. No terrible role, no public downfall, no dramatic scandal. Hollywood resonated with only one hidden truth. Working with Debra Winger was no longer desirable. She remained silent for years after being labeled tough, conceited, and uncontrollable. No explanations. No compromises, no image-repairing interviews. However, the reality is never straightforward, as is the case with many Hollywood truths. Every critique has a backstory. Every icy look conceals an unhealed wound. Debra Winger's outbursts were accompanied by insults that would have caused harm to anyone else. The connections that influenced and disrupted Debra Winger's career will be discussed in this article. The directors who attempted to muzzle her, the producers who rejected her, the co-stars who mistreated her, and the friendships that never materialized. This is not the tale of an actress who rebels. From love to a tooth-shattering slap, it tells the tale of a lady who dared to say no in a world that only loved those who said yes, like John Travolta. Debra Winger's breakthrough performance in 1980's Urban Cowboy wasn't the only thing that made her famous in Hollywood. Additionally, it was the first time she had ever been in a passionate yet unstable relationship. John Travolta, a rising star who recently starred in Saturday Night Fever, was her co-star. He was affable but unpredictable, charming, and defiant. Winger knew something was wrong from the moment they met. Travolta didn't begin with a salutation or a straightforward congrats. Rather, he inquired about her Jewish heritage. Then inquired as to whether she had attended college right away. Questions that were innocuous at first glance, but to Winger, they conveyed a subliminal bias, a judgment based on background, education, and looks. Finally, he said something obscenely sexual that she has never said in public. As though the film itself were lured to disorder, something nevertheless kindled in the midst of that early tension. They ran into each other. They transformed into a violent, turbulent relationship on film. They started a real, poisonous, but intoxicating, romance off-screen. Travolta was told to slap Winger's character in a particular romantic scene, which is a typical false hit like any other movie take. However, he gave her a real slap when the cameras were rolling. One of her teeth was broken by the force of it. There was simply sorrow, no apologies, no stop to see how she was doing. After that smack, Travolta proposed to her in an odd turn of events that was both physical and worse, emotional. Debra Winger declined. No big scene, no long explanation. When she realized the relationship had shifted from passion to dominance and control, she instinctively said no. She left him and their twisted relationship behind. She would carry the wounds from that first significant relationship with her throughout her professional life. She didn't react negatively or positively when asked about Travolta years later. Only silence, the type that comes from someone who has been injured, loved, and trusted in a way that Hollywood never allows anyone to fully recover. One of Debra Winger's greatest works of art was An Officer and a Gentleman, which featured Richard Gere, the unbreakable brick wall. She was nominated for an Oscar and was commended by critics for her genuineness and depth of emotion, yet she spoke candidly about the experience. Winger saw her co-star Richard Gere as nothing more than a brick wall, despite the fact that viewers saw him as a lovely, restrained, and soulful man. There was seriousness in that phrase. Despite portraying a famous romantic relationship on film, it became for years a symbol of the resistance and separation between two individuals who were unable to connect off-screen. In his memoir, Louis Gossett Jr., who played the tough drill instructor, later attested that Winger and Gere stayed away from one another while the camera wasn't running. No talking. No communication. Not even the slightest hint of warmth. It was never denied by Richard Gere. He acknowledged that there was conflict between them in an interview, but he provided no additional context. In contrast, Winger was much more open. She admitted to being irritated due to her own acting anxieties in an interview with the Daily Mail, and she frequently vented her frustrations on her co-stars, particularly Gere. But it was more than a personal dispute. Behind the camera was where Winger suffered the most severe injuries. She said in an interview with The Telegraph that she was handled like a damaged object by producer Don Simpson and director Taylor Hackford. Even by the standards of 1980s Hollywood, Simpson, who was notorious for his offensive remarks about women, once remarked bluntly that Winger was ineffable. It didn't end there, either. Winger recalled that the producers thought her face appeared bloated on screen, so they ordered her to take diuretics on specific days. These were not suggestions from doctors. They originated from the guys in the editing room, who believed they had the right to treat women like props and control their bodies. Winger was incensed, but she refused to give up. She took issue with a specific scenario because she felt it compromised her character's credibility. Then the whole shoot stopped. Although Taylor Hackford was furious, he eventually had to acknowledge that Winger was spot on from an acting perspective after watching the video. The issue in Hollywood was that, particularly for women, being correct did not always equate to forgiveness. A male actor is a perfectionist when he stops a performance because he is unhappy. Winger was called a problem, difficult, and uncontrollable when she did it. Taylor Hackford and Don Simpson. Conflicts with co-stars like Richard Gere may have been chilly, submissive, and silent when the producer takes on the role of the bully, as was the case with Debra Winger. What transpired behind the camera, particularly with producer Don Simpson and director Taylor Hackford, was even more embarrassing. A daily loss of dignity that gradually reduced her sense of value. Winger was more than simply an actress honing her craft on the set of An Officer and a Gentleman. These males made no effort to conceal their desire to control everything, including her body, and she was a young woman navigating a male-dominated environment. Winger once referred to the strong but inflexible director Taylor Hackford as an animal. It wasn't disrespectful. Was the instinctive reaction of a person who had been forced into a difficult situation too often. Despite being the film's emotional core, Winger claimed she was regularly treated like a second-class actor. However, the most severe injuries weren't caused by those behind the camera. The editing room was where they came from. Producer Don Simpson is notorious for his brutality, vulgarity, and obsession with domineering actresses. Debra Winger wasn't fable enough to be the lead, he once declared in front of the whole team. Encased in misogyny and the objectification that has long afflicted the profession, this is a terrible insult. It didn't stop there, either. Simpson would watch the footage after every day of filming and conclude that her face was bloated. She required the use of diuretics. No doctor's consultation. Her personal comfort was not taken into account. She had to take medication if she didn't appear attractive enough on screen. Debra Winger hadn't remained quiet. She resisted. She once objected to filming a sequence that she believed grossly distorted the character's psychology. This kind of defiance would have been commonplace for male actors of the era. However, Winger was labeled as difficult, unpleasant, and isolated in her own film as a result. The production delay infuriated director Hackford. However, after re-examining the scene and re-evaluating her arguments, he was forced to acknowledge that she was correct in her interpretation, not just emotionally, but also architecturally and psychologically. However, that acknowledgement was accompanied by a silent caution rather than an apology. You can't effortlessly manage her. And nothing is more dangerous in Hollywood than an uncontrollable woman. Winger never collaborated with Hackford or Simpson again after that movie. She seldom ever mentioned them in interviews, but when she did, it was like an indictment. I still remember. I just decided not to go through that again. Madonna. It's not the same league or path. Debra Winger played the lead in A League of Their Own in the early 1990s, a poignant tale about female baseball players during World War II. Was a project in which she had a strong belief. For 3 consecutive months, she trained with the Chicago Cubs, developing her physical stamina, mastering the sports techniques, and getting ready to act like a true athlete. This was more than simply another part for Winger. It was a sincere dedication to women, history, and the performing arts. And then there was Madonna. Winger remained calm when she learned that the well-known pop singer would be joining the cast. She didn't dispute. She didn't voice her displeasure to the producers or director. She took one action. She turned to go. Just plain. Firmly. Without justification. And that wasn't the kind of film that she wanted to be a part of, she later told the media. Although she never directly attacked Madonna, Winger gave a cold, chilly response to a question concerning the music singer's performances in the movie that was well recognized by everyone in Hollywood. Madonna's filmography, in my opinion, speaks for itself. Just a sigh from someone who could no longer stand artistic compromise, no drama, no resentment. Winger didn't leave the movie out of pride or envy. She knew, so she turned to leave. A project no longer merits your talent or integrity when your heart no longer believes in it. Gina Davis took her place, like a master craftsman who sees poor quality materials and decides not to start. A revered part of American pop culture, the movie became a huge success. Winger, however, had no regrets because, in her opinion, an actor's absence might occasionally be their last creative act. MacLaine, Shirley. A conflict that would never end. None of Debra Winger's strained connections were more intense than her relationship with Shirley MacLaine, whom she referred to as mother on screen but never even approached as a co-worker in real life. Both actors were nominated for Best Actress in the 1983 picture Terms of Endearment, which won Best Picture at the Oscars and starred them as mother and daughter. Although the movie depicted a heartwarming tale of maternal love, the set was a silent battlefield where two independent-minded women fought in every scene, every look, and every interruption. MacLaine, who was now a star with 3 Oscar nominations, showed up on set wearing a fur coat, a sophisticated dress, and the composed air of classic Hollywood. On the other hand, Winger arrived wearing a short skirt, combat boots, and a belligerent expression. In her memoir, MacLaine subsequently said, "I saw her and thought, oh my God, it wasn't a judgment. It was a warning from a different generation, an instinctive one." James L. Brooks, the filmmaker, had to give in right away. Even they didn't understand their bond. When Winger, who was often impetuous and forceful, yelled at MacLaine during a take when she missed her mark, the tension reached a height. "You hit the mark." Never one to back down, MacLaine understands what it means to hit a mark. Winger left at that point, raised her skirt a little, glanced over her shoulder, and spit in Shirley MacLaine's face. This incident was later described by MacLaine in her memoir, My Lucky Stars. It was not denied by Winger. When Andy Cohen asked her on a 2018 talk show if the allegation of her farting and licking her feet was accurate, she answered, "There's something true in that," with a slight smile. Unlike opponents, they did not despise one another. Like untamed creatures imprisoned in a single cage, they challenged one another until only one could come out of it unharmed, at least in terms of size. When MacLaine took the stage to accept her Oscar, she said the now famous phrase, "I deserve this." Winger wasn't the target of it. However, everyone in the room knew who was standing in its shadow. "We didn't eat lunch together," Winger subsequently stated. However, there was respect, the type of respect boxers have for one another after a vicious battle. Even when you are aware of your opponent's lethal actions, you would never want to rematch. The public hasn't let it go despite the passage of over 40 years. Talk shows continue to inquire. It is still revived by the media. Winger simply smirks each time. Allowing others to rewrite the story however they see fit, as certain conflicts, whether won or lost, never fully go away. A runway model who poses as an actor is John Malkovich. Debra Winger has collaborated with a wide spectrum of co-stars by the late 1980s, including emotionally erratic screen moms, physically abusive lovers, and lovely but destructive co-stars. However, she met John Malkovich, a man she bluntly characterized as a runway model, on the set of The Sheltering Sky in 1990. Winger claimed that he appeared to be playing himself rather than the role, not because he was attractive or wore extravagant clothing. That was the ultimate crime for Winger. She supported honest, unvarnished acting, unrestrained emotion, and the grounded bond between two individuals in a shared frame. In contrast, Malkovich, with his icy stare, abstract approach, and speech pattern that sounded like an internal monologue, was totally unnoticeable to her. She observed a well-designed show devoid of a soul in each scene, but no scene companion. Winger never concealed her emotions. No evasions, no analogies. She didn't hesitate when asked in one interview about her experience working with Malkovich. He resembled a model on the catwalk. His movements were exquisite. I didn't know who I was speaking to, but his face was lovely. Some said that Winger's outbursts were motivated by envy as her co-star avoided interacting with her. However, it was not shocking to those who had collaborated with her. Pretend was something she detested. She disapproved of shows that were based on the audience rather than a character's reality. And despite being meticulously created by filmmaker Bernardo Bertolucci and full of eerie Moroccan scenery and metaphysical profundity, Winger found The Sheltering Sky to be a meaningless experience. Because the man who sat across from her every day never really looked her in the eye, not because of the screenplay or the photography. Winger never collaborated with Malkovich again after that movie, and she never spoke negatively about him in the years that followed. He was only a dim glimmer in her mind, akin to the exact manner of behaving that she could never tolerate: cold, aloof, and callous. During her 20 years in Hollywood, Debra Winger lacked personality, fame, and talent. She was nominated for an Oscar, played famous parts, and was adored by her fans for her unvarnished honesty. She also possessed ego, intelligence, and a refusal to conform, qualities that Hollywood rarely accepted in a woman. These traits are referred to as independence and artistic vision for guys. They became challenging, unfeasible, and hazardous for Winger. In an interview, director James Bridges once acknowledged that he had been so upset with Winger that he had stopped filming when she refused to do a sequence. But after reviewing it, he had to admit that she was entirely correct. To sabotage, Winger did not revolt. When the truth was misrepresented, a character was made up, or an actress was used as a puppet to influence men, she just wouldn't remain mute. She once claimed that a male actor would be labeled a perfectionist if he performed in the same way as me. But me? I was problematic. Women aren't forgiven like that in Hollywood. Those who refuse to submit to directors who turn down parts they don't believe in are not forgiven. Who spoke honestly about over-glorified male celebrities, and Winger was well aware of this. Standing next to her spouse in an open field in Ireland in 1995, she turned to him and stated, "I'm done. No regrets. Not a drama. No announcement of retirement at a news conference." Realizing that the roles being given were merely worn-out copies of what she had already done, she just took a step back. No more difficulties, no more open communication, and no more justification for continuing to put up with it. She decided to go. To view the world quietly, be a wife, and be a mother. Should forego red carpets in favor of modest stages. Debra Winger wasn't a Hollywood bad girl, she lived elegantly rather than for art. She didn't fight addiction, ruin sets, or use the media to spread false information. She simply never learned the proper way to bend her head. Perhaps that's why Hollywood, a culture that values submissive women, was unsure of how to handle her. Perhaps this is also the reason she has never been forgotten. Debra Winger's failure did not cause her to vanish. She left when she was still at the top, when she had options, when she could still refuse, and that alone was the one thing that Hollywood would never forgive. People didn't like her. She refused to conform to the pre-planned frame that male filmmakers had created. She didn't hesitate to annoy her co-stars. She didn't pretend to be sensitive in order to get the next role. She wouldn't give in. And in a field that relies heavily on conformity, that was her biggest transgression. Debra Winger fought, got hurt, and was shoved out of the way. However, she never cheated on herself. Possibly, that is more valuable than 3 golden Oscars. The public is finally understanding now as more young actors start to speak out against injustice, the pressure to keep quiet, and the control over their image and dignity. Winger fought that battle decades ago by himself, without supporters, without social media, and without a hashtag campaign. She just had one thing, a voice that would not be quieted. Thus, this is the answer to the question of why Debra Winger was never adored in the movie business. Did she dare to express what others were scared to say, or was she just too challenging? How about you? What would you do if you were Debra Winger, torn between independence and stardom? Leave a comment with your ideas. Don't forget to hit follow so you don't miss the following tale if this one made you think. We bring the brave, rebellious soul into the light.